Rachel Bennett lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling of her bedroom. Her husband, David, was snoring quietly in his sleep next to her, his even breathing adding to the silence of the house. Outside, rain was falling softly, a light autumn drizzle typical of suburban Seattle. The dim light from the street lamp cast blurred silhouettes on the ceiling from behind the curtains, as if reflecting her confused thoughts. In this darkness and the rustle of raindrops, Rachel felt strangely detached, as if she were watching her life from the outside, like a silent movie where everything moves but nothing changes. She rolled over onto her side, pressing herself against the cool sheets. Her thin, almost fragile frame seemed even smaller under the weight of an elusive restlessness. Her hair brown, soft, slightly curly spread across the pillow. David had once said he loved to bury his face in it in the morning. Now he barely touched her, except for occasional gestures in the kitchen or the car. Rachel closed her eyes and asked herself, when was the last time she felt truly alive? Somewhere deep inside, a dull ache stirred. A heavy but painfully familiar feeling surfaced in her chest, a longing for herself, the one who remained somewhere in the past. Rachel remembered how 12 years ago, young and full of hope, she married David. Then it seemed to her that a long journey awaited them, filled with joy, love, and common dreams. They loved to walk along the bay, holding hands, making plans for a house, children, travel, talking about future books that she would write, about the business that he would open. But years of marriage have washed away the bright colors, turning the living picture into a faded sketch. Instead of spontaneous kisses, there are tired smiles. Instead of nightly conversations under the moon, there are discussions of Bill's and Lily's schedule. Their 10-year-old daughter has become, perhaps, the only thread that truly connects them. Lily is alive, bright, with sparkling eyes, full of the energy that Rachel once felt in herself. And yet, lying in bed next to the husband she once loved to the point of dizziness, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had taken a wrong turn. Was this the adult life she had dreamed of? Or had she simply gotten lost in the expectations of others, forgetting her own desires? Over the years, Rachel had been fading away. Not all at once, but like the slow dying of a fire in a fireplace. First the bright flame of love and passion, then the steady warmth of family comfort, and then only barely noticeable embers under a layer of ash. She sighed, trying not to disturb her husband. It seemed that she had everything: a stable marriage, a house in a quiet green area, a beloved daughter, a job as a school psychologist, where she helps children cope with their problems. But here's the paradox. While helping others find their inner support, Rachel had long since lost her own. She felt that she had forgotten how to be alive. A recent episode came to mind, finally convincing her that she and David had lost touch. Their wedding anniversary was to be in the fall, their 12th. Rachel had thought long and hard about how to celebrate it, not pompously, not ostentatiously, but in her own way at home, with a hint of former tenderness. She had booked a table in advance at a small, cozy restaurant by the bay, where they had once often dropped in at the beginning of their family life in those years when they would hold hands even just in the parking lot of a supermarket. That evening she dressed a little differently than usual. She put on a dark blue dress that emphasized the line of her shoulders, let her hair down, which she usually put in a bun, applied light makeup, and on her wrists, the perfume that David gave her for the second year of marriage. The same with notes of jasmine and vanilla that once made him smile, closing his eyes. Her heart beat unevenly, a timid spark of hope lived in it. What if this small holiday, this attempt to return to the past, even for one evening, will help melt the ice between them? But David was late at work. It was after 7 when he called. His voice was tired and rushed, and he said guiltily that he hadn't had time, that everything had come at the last minute. Rachel stood at a table in the restaurant, clutching the phone to her ear, overlooking the gray but still beautiful evening bay. She tried to hide her disappointment, even from herself. She smiled, though no one could see, and quietly said, "I understand." Then she went to the counter and, looking down, asked to cancel the order. She walked home slowly, in the rain, without opening her umbrella. Drops rolled down her cheeks, as if hiding tears that she didn't want to show even to the street. The apartment was dark and cold. The light from the street lamp fell on the floor in a long yellow rectangle. She took off her coat, went to the window, and simply stood there, looking into the darkness until the clock hands turned past 9. Late that evening, David finally returned. He was holding a bouquet of roses, lush, tightly budded, clearly bought in a hurry at a convenience store. He kissed her cheek and said wearily, "Happy anniversary, darling." Then he took off his jacket, muttered something about a tiring day, and went into the bedroom without even asking how her evening had gone. Rachel was left alone in the kitchen. She looked at those beautiful but alien roses, as if they were something from another life. Her heart inside felt like it was wrapped in ice-cold, thick mute. She didn't make a scene, didn't ask a single question, didn't say what she was expecting, what she was hoping for. She simply silently put the flowers in the vase. A year ago, she might have tried to talk, to explain, to find a way to him. But now she had neither the strength nor the faith that it would change anything. That night, she did not go to bed right away. She stayed in the empty living room with the dim light of the floor lamp, listening to the ticking of the clock and the autumn rain continuing to drum on the glass. She cried quietly, almost soundlessly, pressing her knees to her chest, and in this silence of hers, there was more pain than in any quarrel. The alarm on her phone vibrated silently on the nightstand, signaling the start of a new day. Rachel stood up carefully, trying not to creak the bed, and tiptoed out of the bedroom. It was a gloomy morning. Pale light filtered through the kitchen windows, diffused by rain clouds. She put the kettle on to heat, making her usual green tea, and automatically began to pack Lily's breakfast for school. The rituals were repeated day after day, like a broken record. Peanut butter and jelly sandwich, apple, juice in a carton. Rachel acted mechanically, her mind wandering. Half an hour later, Lily came downstairs, disheveled from sleep, in pajamas with kittens. The girl rubbed her eyes and sleepily said, "Mom, is it morning already?" "Already, sweetheart," Rachel replied softly, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her daughter's face. "Breakfast is almost ready. Go wash up, okay?" Lily nodded and trudged off to the bathroom. Rachel watched her go, smiling. Her daughter was her pride and joy, lively, spontaneous, with an endless imagination. She had held on all these years for Lily, telling herself that the most important thing was stability for the child, a full house, a familiar routine. "It's okay," David liked to say when she tried to broach the subject of what was troubling her. "You're just tired, that's all." But Rachel knew it wasn't just fatigue. She felt invisible not just to her husband, but sometimes to herself. It was as if she had lost her reflection. When she looked in the mirror in the morning, she saw her neatly styled dark hair, her tired brown eyes, her familiar half-smile. But inside, she felt no connection to this woman. It was as if her role as wife, mother, psychologist had displaced the girl she once was, dreamy, creative, in love with life. David appeared in the kitchen, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants. He yawned, putting on his watch as he went. "Good morning," he said quietly. "Good," Rachel responded. The husband poured himself some coffee from the coffee maker. They were silent for a few moments. Usually, David would scroll through the news on his phone or check his email at that moment. Today, he glanced at Lily's already packed lunchbox and nodded. "Thanks for packing her lunches. I'm always overwhelmed, you know." "It's okay," Rachel replied, looking down. She noticed that she didn't say please or you're welcome. She simply waved him off with the phrase, "It's okay," just like he did. Perhaps she had picked up this manner of smoothing over any rough spots with words from him. Silence fell again, broken only by the patter of rain on the glass. David finished his coffee and put the mug in the sink. "I'll probably be late today. A client from New York is arriving. I need to meet him," he said, already heading into the corridor. "Okay," Rachel nodded. She tried to keep her voice casual. "Will you have time to pick Lily up from school, or should I?" David paused, apparently considering the schedule. "If I manage to get free, I'll take it. But perhaps it's better to be on the safe side, be prepared, in case I'm late," he said, not looking at her, but adjusting the strap of his watch. Without looking at her, This detail stung Rachel. Once David looked into her eyes when he spoke, touched her shoulder, smiled in the morning. Now he spoke, turning away as if she were part of the interior, the usual background of his life. She just silently watched as he threw his jacket over his t-shirt, the smell of a wet razor still lingering somewhere. "Okay, see you later," David said. "Love you." "And we you," Rachel answered automatically. The door slammed. Her gaze fell on a family photo hanging on the wall near the refrigerator. In the picture, she and David were hugging 5-year-old Lily on the beach by the ocean. Everyone was laughing and waving at the camera. That trip to Florida was one of the few bright memories of recent times. Rachel had believed then that their family was happy. Now she looked at the smiling people in the photo and barely recognized them. It seemed like they were some alien, carefree versions of themselves from the past, and the current reality was completely different. In the silence that followed, Rachel leaned her back against the kitchen counter. "I love you." It sounded routine and mundane, almost mechanical. Before, those words made her heart beat faster, but now, she looked down at her phone, checking the time. She, too, had to get ready for work at the school where she held appointments with students and their parents. It was a good job, stable, giving her the feeling that she was doing something useful. It was all the more offensive that, while she was helping to mend the cracks in other people's souls, she was ignoring the huge crack in her own life. When Lily was finally sent to the school bus, all bundled up and dressed in a yellow raincoat, Rachel stood on the porch and watched her daughter run comically through the puddles to the bus stop. Lily waved goodbye, a bright ray of childhood, carefree and joyful even on a gray morning. Rachel waved back and felt a lump in her throat. That ray was worth living for. But she wanted to not only exist for someone else, but also feel the sunshine inside herself. Right now, there was only gray and dampness inside, like in this overcast landscape. A quiet street stretched out before her, covered in rain-soaked maple leaves. The gray sides of her neighbors' houses were barely visible through the drizzle. In the distance, tall pine trees loomed darkly. The Seattle suburbs were covered in evergreens, but today even they seemed gloomy in the misty morning light. She grabbed an umbrella, got into her car, and headed to work. Usually she left early so as not to rush. Today, looking at the gray curtain of rain outside her windshield, Rachel suddenly realized that she did not want to go to school right away. She needed to get away for a while to step out of her role as wife, mother, psychologist, and just be herself, even for a few minutes. On the corner of the main street of the suburb was a small cafe that she often passed. Not a chain, but a cozy one with display windows behind which wooden tables and shelves with books were visible. The sign read Sunrise Cafe, Sunny Cafe, although ironically there was no sun or hint of dawn this morning. Making a spontaneous decision, Rachel turned into the cafe's parking lot. It was surprisingly warm and welcoming inside. The air was filled with the aroma of freshly ground coffee and cinnamon. The space was small, a counter with a cash register, a barista behind it, a few tables by the windows. There were almost no customers, only an elderly couple in the corner chatting peacefully over cups, and a young man with a laptop by the wall. Rachel pulled down her hood and ran her hand through her hair, slightly damp from the rain. She suddenly felt like the heroine of someone else's life, as if it was not she, an exemplary wife, who ran in to drink coffee alone, but some free woman who could allow herself such a small pleasure. "Good morning," came a friendly voice from the counter. Rachel looked up. The barista, a man in his early 30s, wearing a plaid shirt and a wisp of stubble on his chin, smiled at her. His black apron was embroidered with a coffee sign and his name, Mark. "What would you like to order? We have excellent lattes and fresh croissants today," he said, meeting her gaze. Rachel felt a sudden shyness wash over her. It had been a long time since she had felt this way. She usually placed her order confidently, without thinking. But now she froze, looking at the menu board. Latte, croissant. For some reason, she didn't want her usual green tea. She wanted something new. "A latte, perhaps," she responded after a pause. "And one croissant." "Good choice," Mark said, almost encouragingly, as if she'd done more than just choose a drink. Cinnamon or classic? Classic, Rachel replied, feeling a real smile appear on her face, the first genuine smile she'd seen in days, it seemed. She paid, received her latte with beautifully whipped foam from Mark, took a warm layered croissant on a saucer. Looking around, she chose a table by the window, from where she could see the leisurely flow of cars and people with umbrellas, hurrying about their business in the rain. The first sip of coffee warmed her from the inside. Rachel leaned back in her chair and exhaled, feeling a rare moment of peace. She took out the book she had been carrying with her for a week, a novel she had never gotten around to reading. She opened it to the first page and ran her finger along the lines. The letters were slightly blurry, maybe because her eyes were tired, or maybe because she had forgotten how to read for herself without regard for time. "Is it a good book?" suddenly came from nearby. Rachel looked up. Mark was standing nearby with a rag in his hand, apparently wiping down the next table, and he glanced at the cover of her book. "I don't know yet," she answered with a polite smile. "I've just started." "Oh, Charles Dickens," he remarked, reading the title. "A classic. Great Expectations." Rachel nodded, slightly surprised. "Yes, in the original. I decided to refresh the English classics." Mark smiled, and wrinkles appeared in the corners of his gray eyes. "Great. I read it at university, but in translation. I'll have to try it in English someday, too." He wanted to return to the counter, but then suddenly said, nodding towards the window, "It's rainy again today. How do you like this sunny morning?" There was a soft irony in his voice. Rachel glanced at the gray landscape beyond the glass, at the drops running down the window. "Perhaps the sun is only in the name of the cafe today," she responded jokingly. Mark laughed quietly. "Exactly. But we have coffee for many. It is like the sun in the morning." Rachel smiled. It suddenly felt easy to talk to this stranger. There was none of the tension or sense of urgency she was used to around people. "You're right," she said. "Coffee helps sometimes." "I'm glad you like it." He nodded at her cup. "My name is Mark, by the way. If you need anything, just ask." Rachel, she introduced herself in response, for some reason feeling the need to give her name. And again his warm smile. "Nice to meet you, Rachel. Have a good morning." He went back to work, and Rachel found herself watching him go. What a nice man, she thought. It seemed like an ordinary conversation, but it warmed her heart a little. She tried to concentrate on her book, but her thoughts were drifting away. An old phrase from her youth kept spinning in her head: "There are no chance encounters." She had never really believed in signs of fate, but now she suddenly wondered, what if this short conversation was a sign? A sign of what? That she could still feel interest, curiosity, and smile sincerely at a stranger. These feelings were almost forgotten. Having finished her coffee and leaving only crumbs of croissant on the saucer, Rachel glanced at her watch. It was time to go to work. She stood up, threw on her coat, and went to throw away the cup. Mark was serving someone, but when he noticed her, he said goodbye briefly. "Have a nice day, Rachel." "And you," she replied, feeling unusually excited that he remembered her name. As Rachel stepped out into the drizzle, she found herself feeling a little less anxious than she had been before. She drove to school feeling like she had made a tiny escape, a few minutes away from the familiar circle of life, and that thought warmed her almost more than the coffee she had drunk. Now tell us where you watch us from, and maybe you or your friends have similar interesting stories. The day passed relatively calmly. After a difficult conversation with Samantha, a fifth grader soon came to her, worried about his grades. Rachel listened to other people's stories, gave advice, helped children sort out their feelings. Usually, by the end of the day, she felt morally tired, devoting herself entirely to these small human dramas. But today, her thoughts kept slipping back to the cozy cafe, to the smile of a barista named Mark. And each time she pulled herself up, why was she suddenly so drawn to thinking about this? After all, this was just a polite person who made her coffee, exchanged a few phrases, nothing more. Soon, she had an individual consultation scheduled. A senior named Samantha, whom Rachel had been seeing for a couple of months, walked timidly into the office. The girl sat down across from her, fiddling with the sleeves of her sweatshirt. Her eyes were red. "Hello, Samantha," Rachel began softly. "How are you today?" The teenager shrugged, looking at the floor. "It's fine," she answered quietly, but her voice betrayed the opposite. Rachel leaned forward a little, trying to meet her gaze. "Hard day." Samantha was silent, then suddenly spoke quickly. "My parents announced yesterday that they were getting a divorce." Her lips trembled, but she bit them, holding back tears. "I knew they were fighting, but I didn't think it would go this far." Rachel felt a pang in her heart. She carefully moved the box of tissues closer to the girl. "I'm so sorry, Samantha. This is hard to accept. I tried to reconcile them," the schoolgirl said, crumpling her handkerchief. "I suggested that we all go to a consultant together, but they just waved me off. And yesterday, Dad said he was leaving to live separately. Mom cried, yelled at him. And I—" Her voice broke. Rachel stood up, walked around the table, and sat down next to the girl, putting her arm around her shoulders. Samantha buried her face in her hands, finally letting the tears fall. "It's so scary, Mrs. Bennet," she whispered. "Now everything will change. I'm afraid it's because of me. I must have behaved badly, gotten bad marks." Rachel shook her head and replied softly but firmly, "It's not your fault. Believe me, sometimes relationships between adults are complicated, and they make decisions about how to live their lives. But it's not because of the children. It's just that mom and dad sometimes get hurt too, and they can't always cope." "But why don't they want to be together anymore?" Samantha asked hoarsely, wiping her eyes. "Everything was fine before." Rachel thought for a moment, choosing her words. How could she explain to a teenager something she didn't fully understand herself? "People change, dear," she said quietly, "and relationships change. Sometimes love goes away or turns into something else. You're right, it's very sad. But it happens, and it doesn't mean your parents stop loving you. They still care about you." Samantha nodded, but looked lost. Rachel continued, "You are in a lot of pain and fear right now. That's normal. But you have the right to talk to them about your feelings, to tell them what's bothering you, to ask them to explain what will happen next. Okay?" The girl sobbed. "I tried. They just say, 'We'll sort everything out, don't worry.'" "How can you not worry?" Rachel understood her better than anyone. She herself had recently told her daughter not to worry. Squeezing Samantha's shoulder slightly, she said, "You can offer them to come together for family consultation. I am ready to talk with both you and them together if they agree." Samantha wiped her nose. "Do you think it will help? I don't promise, but it's worth a try. The main thing is to remember you're not alone. There's me, other adults who will support you. And friends, probably." The girl smiled weakly. "Thank you, Mrs. Bennet." Rachel returned to her seat, giving her time to calm down. She was seething with worry. The words she had spoken echoed in her own soul. People change, love fades. Was Lily going to go through the same thing as this girl? The thought tormented her, but Rachel pushed it away, focusing on Samantha. They also talked about practical steps, how to keep a diary of feelings, how to contact the school psychologist, that is, her at any time. Half an hour later, the girl was a little calmer. Later in the evening, sorting through papers in her office, Rachel realized that she didn't want to go home. More precisely, she didn't want to go back to the emptiness that awaited her behind the familiar door. For the first time in a long time, the prospect of returning to family dinner didn't please her, but rather frightened her. More forced politeness with David, small talk, or only about Lily's lessons, then silence in front of the TV. And so on day after day. The idea of stopping at that cafe on the way home came spontaneously. She convinced herself that she just needed to wait out the traffic and at the same time grab some dessert for her tea. Besides, Lily would probably want something sweet after school. It seemed like an innocent excuse. It was already dark when Rachel parked at Sunrise Cafe for the second time that day. The rain continued to fall, its drops glistening in the light of the street lamps. Inside the cafe, it was warmer than in the morning and a little more crowded. A couple of students were poring over their laptops. The older couple had apparently already left, but two men in business suits had appeared, discussing something over coffee. Mark was still standing behind the counter. When he saw Rachel enter, his eyebrows raised in recognition. "Good evening. Are you coming to dinner with us?" There was a friendly note in the voice again. Rachel suddenly felt uneasy about coming back. What if he thought she was too lonely or too busy? But she walked boldly up to the counter. "Good evening," she said. "Yes, I decided to treat myself to dessert after work." "Well, that's right," Mark winked. "In such bad weather, it's always nice to eat something sweet. By the way, we have fresh apple pie today." "Sounds tempting," Rachel smiled. "A piece of pie and a cappuccino, please." While Mark was preparing the order, they exchanged a few words. Rachel learned that the cafe belonged to the owner, and Mark worked there part-time in the evenings, combining it with freelancing. "Freelance?" she asked, hoping the question wouldn't seem tactless. "What do you do?" Mark, deftly operating the coffee machine, replied, "I write articles, stories, sometimes custom texts for websites, all sorts of things. It's not very profitable yet, so I work as a barista for stability. But it's probably interesting," Rachel noted with genuine respect. She had always been impressed by creative people. "Ya writer?" He smiled modestly. "Well, it's hard to call yourself a writer. Rather, a person who loves to write. Sometimes it turns out well, sometimes it's a waste." Rachel suddenly felt very far from his world. She remembered how she had once tried to write short stories at university, but had given up, deciding that psychology was closer to real life. And here in front of her was a man who had dared to follow his dream, albeit in a semi-professional format. "Great," she repeated quietly, accepting the cup of cappuccino from his hands. "You probably read a lot." "I try," Mark nodded, "when I have time. And you? You mentioned Dickens this morning, so you like books too." "Yes, I've always loved to read," Rachel admitted. "But now, to be honest, I rarely manage to find time. Work, home, you know." Mark smiled knowingly, holding out the bag with the pie. "Of course, I understand. I have a daughter myself. She's 10 years old." "Really?" Rachel raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Are you married?" Mark was slightly embarrassed. "I was. Divorced. My daughter lives with me half the time. Today is her day to be with her mother, so I had a free evening to work." Sorry, I didn't mean to get personal," Rachel said, embarrassed, taking the pie. "Everything is fine," he answered calmly. "That's life. The main thing is that my daughter and I communicate a lot. She is everything to me." There was a hint of sadness in his eyes as he said this, and Rachel felt a kinship. Here was a man who had also been through family troubles, who also valued his child above all else. She wanted to ask something else, her tongue itched to ask why his marriage had broken up, or how he was coping, but she stopped herself in time. They barely knew each other, there was no point in delving deeper. After a moment's silence, Rachel said quietly, "Your daughter is lucky to have such a father." Mark even froze in surprise, then nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I hope you are right." They exchanged warm glances. At that moment, new customers entered the cafe, and Mark had to switch to them. Rachel took her cappuccino and pie. Her soul was light and anxious at the same time. She caught herself not wanting to leave. She should stay, sit back at the table, and continue the conversation. Mark aroused genuine interest in her. She wanted to know more about him. But her mind gave the signal, stop. She was a married woman. She just came in to buy dessert. Nothing more. Rachel glanced briefly at the barista, who was working hard. He was no longer looking at her, absorbed in his orders. It was for the best. She slipped quietly out of the cafe into the cool, damp air. On the way home, her heart was beating a little faster than usual. "So what was that, she asked herself. "You came for a pie, and what did you get? A few minutes of pleasant conversation. That's not a crime." She shook her head as if arguing with herself. Strangely, this evening's visit had given her strength. Rachel felt something stirring inside, as if the ice had broken. At home, Lily immediately pounced on the pie her mother had brought, happily thanking her. David, who had managed to pick her up from school, was already sitting at his laptop in the kitchen, finishing off the warmed-up pizza. "You're late," he said, without even looking up from the screen. "I stopped at a cafe and bought a pie," Rachel answered calmly, putting the bag on the table. She took off her coat and went to the stove to warm up some tea. "How's your day?" "It's okay," the husband responded briefly. Lily was excitedly talking about school, that they had a science fair coming up, that the teacher had complimented her drawing. Rachel was listening to her daughter, asking questions, smiling at her enthusiasm. David only occasionally chimed in, "Uh-huh," or "That's great." He was clearly deep in his work, sometimes frowning as he stared at the screen. Gradually, the evening flowed into the usual routine, checking homework, putting Lily to bed, exchanging a few phrases with David about the electricity bill and plans for the weekend, which, as usual, boiled down to a trip to the supermarket and cleaning the house. Everything was as usual. Only inside Rachel everything was different. Having barely put her daughter to bed and wished her good night, Rachel closed the nursery door and leaned against the wall in the hallway. Her heart began to pound again as she remembered Mark's smile, his voice. She sternly told herself, enough. It was just one day, just a kind person who showed concern, nothing more. But as Rachel fell asleep that night, she found herself thinking about the next morning. She desperately wanted to stop at that cafe on the way back, even if it was just for 5 minutes, even if it was just to say hi and have a coffee in silence before putting on her psychologist and wife mask. In the cold darkness of the bedroom, she lay with her back to David, feeling him even breathing. Once they had fallen asleep in each other's arms, but now there was an invisible wall between them. For the first time in a long time, Rachel did not want to cry about this fact, did not want to feel sorry for herself. Instead, she thought about the latte waiting for her in the morning, and maybe a few warm words from a man who looked at her with interest and kindness. With this thought, she smiled imperceptibly in the darkness. Morning visits to the cafe became a quiet habit for Rachel. Like a little secret she carefully kept, those 10 or 15 minutes before work belonged only to her. Every morning Sunrise Cafe greeted her with the aroma of freshly baked goods and Mark's warm smile. He always greeted her as if he was genuinely happy to see her, and this feeling gradually became as necessary for Rachel as a breath of air. A week passed, then another. Rachel didn't even notice how it began to take a little longer to get ready in the morning, to look better. Previously, she was content with a strict bun or a quick ponytail, a minimum of makeup just so as not to be late. Now, sometimes she twirls a lock of hair around her finger, giving her hair volume and applying light blush gloss to her lips. She told herself that she was doing this for herself to feel confident, and yet, looking in the mirror in the morning, she caught herself thinking that she wanted to please. Who? She tried not to formulate an answer, but her heart told her him. Mark, for his part, also seemed to be waiting for her arrival. He already knew that she would rather have a latte than a cappuccino. He remembered her love for classic croissants. Sometimes, seeing her, he would ask slyly, "How about something new today?" and offer to try pumpkin pie, then a blueberry muffin. Rachel laughed and sometimes agreed, and sometimes she stood her ground with a smile. During these short meetings, they managed to talk about many things, little by little. It turned out that they had common favorite books and movies. Mark, with shining eyes, asked about her work and was sincerely interested in how she copes with the emotional burden of a school psychologist. Rachel, who was used to not being listened to much at home, was at first even at a loss from such attention. She told him funny stories from her school life, carefully avoiding the saddest stories, and Mark always listened attentively, sometimes inserting jokes or his own thoughts. In response, he shared stories about his stories and articles, about how sometimes it is difficult to force yourself to write if there is no inspiration, about funny customers of the cafe, about the pranks of his daughter. Little Hannah, that was the girl's name, studied in the 4th grade and, according to Mark, loved to draw comics. Rachel caught herself liking these stories, liking the sparkle of humor in his eyes when he talks about his daughter. One morning, closing the notebook in which Mark was quickly writing something down between visitors, he suddenly asked, "Rachel, can I offer you something?" Of course, she put down the unfinished novel, a little surprised by his serious tone. Mark handed her several sheets of paper, stapled together. "This is my story. Well, one of the ones I wrote. I thought you might be interested in taking a look. You mentioned that you haven't read anything just for yourself in a long time." Rachel carefully picked up the sheets of paper with small print on them. "Thank you," she muttered, feeling a strange mixture of joy and embarrassment. No one had given her anything for a long time, and here was a story written by a person she liked. "I'd be happy to read it. Just tell me honestly later how it is, okay?" Mark smiled, and again warm sincerity could be seen in his gaze. "Your opinion is important to me." Rachel nodded, tucking the pages into her bag like treasure. Necessarily. All day she was restless, waiting for the moment when she could read this story. Only in the evening, after putting Lily to bed, she quietly went into the living room, sat down under the floor lamp, and took out the sheets of paper. David had long since gone to his office to sort through his work mail, and judging by the silence, he was carried away for a long time. Rachel straightened out the crumpled sheets and began to read. The story was called First Snow. It was about a man who experienced a tragedy as a child, the death of his mother, and since then was afraid of the first winter days when it snowed, because that was the day she died. But one day, already an adult, the main character meets a little girl in the yard who made a snowman and invites him to help. In this girl, he sees himself the same lonely child. Gradually, helping her, he overcomes his fear of the first snow and learns to enjoy winter again. The ending was bright and sad at the same time. The hero calls his long-estranged father to say that he misses him and wants to meet. After reading the last lines, Rachel noticed that her eyes were moist. Mark's story had touched her soul. It was sincere and deeply understanding of people's experiences. She quietly folded the sheets of paper. A warm feeling of gratitude and admiration spread inside her. Yes, she admired Mark, his talent, his warmth. And this feeling, no matter how dangerous it was to admit it, made her happy. The next day, she could hardly wait until morning to thank him. As soon as she entered the cafe, Rachel headed straight to the counter. "Mark, your story," she began, barely having time to say hello. "It's amazing. I read it yesterday and even cried a little." Mark's face beamed. "Really?" he asked, clearly pleased. "I'm glad you liked it. To be honest, I was a little worried about how you would take it." "He touched me very much." Rachel put her hand on her heart, not shying away from expressing her emotions. "You conveyed the hero's feelings so subtly. And the girl, just wonderful." Mark looked down in embarrassment, but his smile was wide. "Thank you. You know, this is perhaps the best praise I have ever heard. It's not every day that you meet such a grateful reader." Their eyes met, and for a few seconds they froze, as if there were no other customers or bar area, just the two of them and something invisible but significant hanging in the air. Rachel felt her heart skip a beat, then speed up. She quickly looked down at the menu, trying to compose herself. I'll have a cappuccino today," she said, hesitating a little. "Of course," Mark answered softly, taking the order as if nothing had happened, although a warm smile still played at the corners of his lips. After that day, their communication became even closer. Mark, encouraged by her reaction to the story, began to text her more often. One evening, Rachel saw a notification on her phone, a letter from Mark to her email. It had an attached file, another story, with a smiley face and the signature, "Thought you might like this." And so their correspondence began. Rachel responded to him late at night, when David was busy with work or already asleep. She shared her impressions of what she had read, asked about his ideas, and told her about her days. Mark invariably responded quickly, as if he, too, had been waiting for her letters. In these secret correspondences, In these morning meetings in cafes, Rachel felt an invisible thread of understanding growing between her and Mark. They did not speak directly about feelings, but they were evident in every word and every look. One day, after a couple more weeks of such communication, Mark dared to write, "I've been thinking about you all day today." Strange, huh? Rachel, reading this message on the screen, felt her breath catch. Her heart literally jumped out of her chest. She did not answer right away. She stared at the screen for a long time, rereading these words. Her head was buzzing. Is this right? What am I doing? She knew that if he reciprocated, this step would be beyond simple friendly communication. It would be an admission, albeit a timid one, that she thought about him too. Rachel closed her eyes, trying to hear the voice of reason. That voice was screaming that she was married, that she had a family. But another voice, quiet, desperate, was asking for at least a drop of happiness for herself. Rachel typed a reply with trembling fingers. I have the same thought. She sent it, feeling both pain and a sweet thrill in her chest. A minute later, a reply came. What? She typed. About that morning coffee and about you. She pressed send, slammed her laptop shut. The correspondence was going through the mail and covered her face with her hands. That's it. The words were spoken. There would be no turning back. The next morning, she was as nervous as a schoolgirl before her first date. When the car stopped at the cafe, Rachel Evans sat behind the wheel for a few seconds, gathering her courage. What if he had taken her letter the wrong way? What if she had opened up in vain? But as soon as she entered, her doubts disappeared. Mark looked at her with such a look that everything inside her turned over. In that look, there was joy, tenderness, and some kind of timid hope. Hello, she said almost in a whisper, approaching the counter. Hello, Mark replied, his voice soft and gentle. As usual? Rachel nodded. She didn't need to clarify that usually meant a latte with a splash of vanilla syrup, which she had recently started adding to her order on Mark's advice, by the way. He began making coffee, and she found her voice. I received your story yesterday, and the letter. Yes, he glanced at her quickly from under his lowered eyelashes. I was afraid that maybe I had gone too far. No, she said quickly, it's okay. I just wanted you to know you're not the only one. Mark stopped, placing his cup on the counter, and looked her straight in the eyes. Thank you for telling me, he said quietly. New customers could enter the cafe at any moment, and there were already people sitting at the tables, but at that moment Rachel heard nothing but her own heart. She looked down, feeling herself blush. Mark returned to the coffee machine, and soon her latte was in front of her. A tiny heart was drawn on the foam in brown syrup. Rachel looked at Mark, surprised. She didn't even know what to say. A small sign, almost a childish gesture, but it warmed her heart. Mark shrugged his shoulders, embarrassed. It seemed like the morning should start with something pleasant. She smiled and, clasping the warm glass with her palms, quietly said, Thank you. They were both silent, and in the silence there was something new, something intoxicating. They both knew that they were drawn to each other, and this attraction was no longer just friendly. The next few days were a sweet haze for Rachel. She lived from morning to morning, from meeting to meeting. During the day, in the school office, she did her work automatically, but when she closed her eyes, she remembered. Mark said this today. Mark smiled like that. Mark touched her fingers when he gave her change. Yes, he still kept within the bounds of decency casual touches, glances, half hints. And yet the tension between them grew. One day he wrote, I want to see you outside the cafe. Can we meet outside of work? It was inevitable, like a rising chord in music, demanding permission. Rachel stared at those words on the screen for a long time, her heart pounding. She knew that if she agreed, it would be a real date, a real betrayal, not just flirting. And yet her fingers wrote the answer, yes, when? They agreed to meet on Saturday afternoon. Rachel made up an excuse at home. She told David she was going to a half-day seminar on child psychology. She felt a pang of guilt about this lie, but she reassured herself. It was just this once. She would just be on her own for a while. Didn't she deserve a break? David was indifferent. He nodded and went back to his laptop. Perhaps if he had been interested and asked questions, it would have been harder for her to deceive him. But his indifference seemed to push her. Go, do what you want, I don't care. On Saturday, Rachel felt her knees shaking as she left the house. She had chosen a dress from the closet, not too fancy, but not casual either, a baby blue, knee-length one that David had once called her most beautiful. She wondered if he would notice if she wore it for him now. She pushed the thought aside. She was not going to see David now. They agreed to meet in a city park near a small lake where families often walked. It seemed public enough not to be suspicious, but private enough to talk. Mark waited for her at the entrance to the park. When he saw Rachel, he paused for a moment, taking her in, then stepped forward with a wide smile. "Hello," he said, his eyes shining with joy. "You're beautiful." Rachel's cheeks turned pink. "Thank you. You look good too." Mark was wearing a casual shirt and jeans, and without an apron, he looked younger and more relaxed. He had a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. "What is this?" she asked, nodding at the bag as they walked down the alley side by side. Mark chuckled sheepishly. "Oh, that. I thought you might want to read some of my notes. I brought along a notebook where I jot down ideas." Rachel laughed softly. "You are incorrigible. In any situation, you are ready to talk about literature." "Well, you love it too," he teased. "I love you," she nodded seriously. "But I came today to get to know you better, not just as an author." He smiled knowingly, stopping at the bench. "Well, ask anything, and I'll tell you anything you want." They sat down next to each other. People were passing around at a distance, mothers pushing strollers, older couples, children frolicking closer to the playground. But their bench felt like a separate world. Rachel was a little lost, not knowing where to begin. There was so much she wanted to know, about his past, about his marriage, about what had gone wrong, how he had come to write, and he probably wanted to ask about her life. Where to begin? Mark himself saved her from awkwardness. "You know, I can probably guess what your first question is. You probably want to ask why I got divorced." Rachel was embarrassed. "Sorry, I guess it's none of my business." "It's all right." He looked her in the eye seriously. "Since we've decided to be frank, I'll tell you. My ex-wife, Emily, and I got married early, for great love, as we thought. But the years went by, I changed, and so did she. She wanted a more secure life, and I had just left the office to write that hit our finances, of course. At some point, we started arguing more than laughing together. She met another, more reliable man, as she said, and we broke up. It was hard primarily because of Hannah, but I tried to be a good father to my daughter. That's pretty much the whole story." Rachel listened to his story, feeling her heart clench. Mark's story partly reflected her own fears, when love dies and people become strangers. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. Mark shook his head. "That's in the past. Maybe I wasn't the perfect husband, but I tried. It's just that sometimes people go their separate ways. It's better to separate than to live a lie." He was silent for a couple of seconds, looking into the distance. Then he added quietly, "I don't regret that we broke up, even though it was painful then. If we hadn't broken up, we would have only tormented each other and Hannah. But after the divorce, I couldn't come to my senses for a long time. I thought I would never risk letting anyone into my heart again. And then, I met you." He smiled a little sadly. "Honestly, I'm still afraid. But when you're around, the fear goes away." The words echoed painfully inside Rachel. Living a lie wasn't that what she was doing, but she nodded sadly. "And you?" Mark asked softly. "Are you happily married?" Rachel looked away, the question she had been dreading. The answer was right there, but saying it out loud felt like a betrayal of her entire life. I don't even know," she finally answered honestly. "Probably not. I used to be. And now, David and I are fine, calm, maybe too calm, so calm that it doesn't feel like life." Mark didn't interrupt, and Rachel continued, feeling a sudden need to speak out. "He is a good man, a caring father, but it's like we turned off our emotions. Every day is the same. I tried to tell him that I was hurt by this emptiness, and he says that we are just tired, that everything is fine. She smiled bitterly, and so I go to deception to feel alive. Absurd. Her eyes filled with tears. She hadn't expected to burst into tears, but talking about family with a stranger, even a close one, was difficult and embarrassing. Mark, without saying a word, gently touched her hand. His fingers covered hers, warming her. "You have nothing to blame yourself for," he said quietly, looking into her face. "You tried to save the marriage. Sometimes love goes away, and it's no one's fault." Rachel wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I feel terrible. I have a wonderful husband, a beautiful daughter, and here I am with you, deceiving them." "You're here because you're sad and lonely," Mark said softly. "Not because you're a bad person, and I'm very glad you're here." He squeezed her hand a little tighter. Their fingers intertwined of their own accord. Rachel looked up, Mark so close, his face inviting, taking her breath away. She knew what was coming, that it was going to cross a line, but she couldn't stop herself. His kiss was quiet, careful. Mark's lips touched hers softly, and the world around her seemed to cease to exist. Rachel closed her eyes and allowed herself to forget everything for a moment: time, place, obligation. She kissed him back, awkwardly and tremulously, feeling her heart pounding in her throat. When they pulled away, both had the same confusion in their eyes, the very line they had just crossed. Rachel exhaled loudly, trying to find the words. "Mark, He put his finger to her lips, stopping her. "Everything is fine. Don't say anything." She nodded, grateful for his understanding. They just sat there, holding hands, until her tears dried and her heart slowed its mad rush. Inside her, she was singing and crying at the same time. Singing from the happiness of being close to someone who understood her, crying from the realization that she was betraying her family. They spent another hour walking around the park. The conversation was now about trivial things, the surrounding nature, the children. Both tried not to think about what would happen next. They did not want to say goodbye, but they had to. Rachel promised to return home by evening. "Can I walk you to your car?" Mark asked as they left the park. "Of course," she nodded. She didn't want to let go of his hand, but as they were leaving the park, Rachel suddenly heard a familiar voice. "Rachel, hi." Her neighbor on the street stopped nearby, pushing a stroller with a baby. The woman's face reflected a slight surprise. "Oh, hi, Sandra," Rachel tried to smile, taking a half step away from Mark without him noticing. "How are you?" "Okay." The neighbor turned her gaze to Mark, who was waiting nearby. "And you decided to go for a walk?" "Yes, I went out to get some fresh air, and I met." She hesitated for a split second. "A colleague. This is Mark. He works at the local library." Mark nodded and smiled politely. "Very nice." Sandra didn't seem to suspect anything unusual. She nodded towards the stroller. "We're just taking a walk before bed." "Well, I won't disturb you." "See you, Rachel." "Yeah, see you later," Rachel muttered. The neighbor disappeared down the alley. Rachel's heart was pounding. "Librarian?" Mark chuckled quietly. "Sorry, the first thing that came to mind," she sighed. "It's okay," he touched her shoulder. "But you see, you have to be more careful." Rachel nodded. They couldn't be too careful. Any time they went out together, it was a risk. This incident made it clear how fragile their position was. As Rachel approached her car, she turned to face Mark. "Thank you for this day," she said quietly. "Thank you," he smiled. "I haven't felt this happy in a long time." Rachel swallowed hard. She wanted to kiss him goodbye, but this was a public place. She just squeezed his hand tightly. "See you soon." "See you soon," he repeated. Already sitting in the car and watching him drive away, Rachel felt a new wave of contradictions wash over her soul. On the one hand, there was the delight of love that had washed over her. On the other, there was excruciating shame and guilt. She was also worried about an accidental encounter with her neighbor. What if Sandra suspected something and told her? But it seemed that the neighbor did not attach any importance to what she had seen. At least, there were no consequences in the following days. At home, she found David and Lily in the living room, watching a cartoon together. Lily jumped up when she saw her mother. "Mommy, you're back early." Rachel hugged her daughter, feeling a heavy heart. David only glanced at her. "Hello? How was the seminar?" "Oh, fine," she muttered, looking down. "We discussed a lot of things." "I see." David nodded and looked at the TV again. Rachel walked into the kitchen, feeling like she couldn't breathe. She had lied, and her husband hadn't even asked any follow-up questions. There was something depressing about his absolute trust. It hadn't occurred to him to doubt her, or even to inquire into the details. Rachel suddenly realized that David was sure that he knew her inside and out, sure that she wasn't capable of making any sudden moves. For him, she was like a reliable piece of furniture in its usual place. "It's better to break up than to live a lie," she remembered Mark saying. But she wasn't ready to destroy everything she had built over the past 12 years. And for what? For a man she had only known for a few months. The next few days were uneasy. Rachel and Mark texted each other every night, but they were more discreet in the cafe now, much like they had been before. He winked at her once, unnoticed by the other customers, and she smiled for half a day. But they generally kept their distance in public. It added an extra layer of mystery to their relationship. Rachel had never been a habitual liar, and she was learning as she went along. She would invent extra school meetings to stay late and see Mark, or she would make excuses for weekend commitments. Once or twice, they managed to squeeze in a few more hours of time together. One evening, Rachel told the family she was going to a friend's birthday party, and she spent it with Mark. They simply walked around the city at night, holding hands in the crowd, trying to appear unfamiliar, but sometimes pressing their shoulders together as if by accident. It was a painfully sweet freedom to be together openly, even among strangers who did not know them. Their relationship grew deeper with each passing day. One day, a couple of weeks before Christmas, Mark invited Rachel to his house for dinner. His daughter was visiting her mother at the time, and he said he would cook something special. Rachel hesitated for a long time. It was a clear step towards intimacy, which she simultaneously craved and dreaded. But in the end, she agreed she wanted too much to be near him in a setting where no one would disturb them. In the evening, having come up with an excuse at home that she had urgent work with the students, yes, she had to lie about the problems of a non-existent child, Rachel went to Mark. He rented a small apartment not far from the cafe on the second floor of an old house. The winter chill was already in the air, the Christmas lights were lit on the streets. Rachel climbed the creaky stairs with bated breath. Mark opened the door, dressed not in his usual apron, but in a dark blue sweater. The apartment smelled of something delicious. He really had cooked dinner. "Come in," he said quietly, letting her in. The apartment turned out to be cozy, a small living room combined with a kitchen, bookshelves everywhere, paintings on the walls, landscapes, abstractions. Rachel noticed several children's toys on a shelf in the corner and a framed photograph Mark with a red-haired girl on his shoulders, both laughing. "Is that Hannah?" Rachel asked, nodding at the photo. "Yeah." Mark came over and also looked at the photo. "We went on a hike last summer." There was love in his voice. Rachel smiled, putting her bag down. "You look like two naughty boys here." "I guess so," he laughed. Dinner passed in a dreamlike state. Mark served pasta with mushrooms and 2 glasses of white wine. They talked, laughed a little, trying not to show how tense and sweet it was for both of them to be alone. When the plates were empty and Mark lit a candle on the coffee table, Rachel knew it was time. They were already sitting next to each other on the sofa, closer than usual, and talking was becoming more and more difficult, words melting away, giving way to looks and touches. Mark gently ran his hand over her cheek, brushing away a stray strand of hair. "You're amazing," he whispered. "You know that?" Rachel smiled with just her lips. "Me? Not at all." "For me, yes." He leaned down and kissed her. This time the kiss was deep, powerful, sweeping away any remaining doubts. Rachel felt herself melting under his touch, the world narrowing to the beat of her heart and the warmth of his hands. She responded with a hungry passion, with the desperation that had been building for years. That night, Rachel betrayed her husband completely, not only in her soul, but also in her body. She and Mark indulged in love, sincere and tender, as if trying not only to satisfy desire, but also to heal each other's old wounds. Rachel cried in whispers as he kissed the scars of her soul, invisible, but so painful. Mark whispered sweet words to her, promising that she was not alone, that she was beautiful. Towards morning, Rachel woke up to the first pale rays of light breaking through the curtain of Mark's bedroom. She was lying on his chest, listening to the steady, calm beating of his heart. The room was quiet and cool. Mark was sleeping, hugging her, a slight smile on his lips. Rachel suddenly wanted so badly to stop time, to stay like this, in this quiet haven where there were no problems and lies. But her gaze fell on the clock on the nightstand. 6:20 am. Reality burst in rudely. It was time for her to go. At home, David was probably already waking up, getting ready to take Lily to school. If she didn't show up before they left, there would be questions. Her heart sank with panic. She carefully freed herself from Mark's embrace and quietly sat on the edge of the bed. Her clothes were lying on the floor. Rachel began to dress, trying not to make any noise, but Mark stirred. He opened his eyes. "Are you leaving already?" The voice is sleepy, surprised. "I'm sorry," Rachel whispered, buttoning her blouse. "I have to go home. David, Lily." Mark raised himself on his elbow and nodded with an understanding look, although disappointment flashed in his eyes. "Of course, I understand." He sat up, running his hand over her shoulder. "Thank you for this night," he said quietly, looking into her eyes. Rachel smiled at the corners of her lips, feeling her heart ache with tenderness towards him. "It is I who should thank you." They shared a short but warm kiss. Mark insisted on walking her to the car. While she was putting on her shoes and tidying herself up, he quickly threw on a t-shirt and jeans. A few minutes later, they were standing by her car. The dawn sky was getting lighter and lighter. Morning was just around the corner. Mark took Rachel's hands. "Take care of yourself, okay?" he asked seriously. "You too," she whispered back. They wanted to hug each other tightly, but there might already be random passers-by on the street, and Rachel held back. Mark opened the door of her car and looked in one last time. "Call when you can." She nodded and got behind the wheel. While she was buckling up, Mark leaned toward the open window and quietly said, "Love you." Rachel froze, looking into his eyes. It was the first time he had said it out loud. A lump came into her throat. She didn't trust her voice, so she raised her hand and touched his cheek gently. "Me too," she finally exhaled. Mark stepped back and Rachel started the engine. His figure left behind as the car rolled out onto the empty morning street. All the way she tried to calm her frantic pulse. The fear of being late mixed with the euphoria of Mark's confession. He loved her, and she... Yes, she loved him, there was no doubt about it, the moment the words left her mouth. Luckily, the Bennett house was still empty when Rachel pulled up. David was probably just dropping Lily off. She quickly tidied herself up, hid her blouse, which smelled of someone else's cologne, in the back of the laundry basket, and put her phone on silent. In her heart, she understood that she had crossed the line beyond which her former life would never return. For some time, she managed to balance. At home, she was a caring mother and wife, although she no longer felt like one, and secretly she was a woman in love, stealing hours for happiness. Although David sometimes noticed that she was absent-minded or excited, he attributed it to work-related issues. He lived his own life. Work, home, rare meetings with friends on weekends. He treated Rachel evenly, as if she were something unchangeable. The Bennett household spent Christmas surprisingly calmly on the surface. Rachel had worked hard to keep the atmosphere pleasant for Lily. They decorated the tree, baked gingerbread cookies together. David's parents came to visit, and Rachel spent the entire day cooking, setting the table, feigning hospitality. David had visibly relaxed over the holidays, joking with his brother on the phone, playing new board games with his daughter. From the outside, everything seemed almost perfect. But inside, Rachel was torn apart. At the holiday table, accepting her father-in-law's compliment on the delicious turkey, She felt like she was barely holding back tears. She wanted someone, anyone, to notice the pain behind her smile, but everyone was too busy with their own affairs or believed in her mask. Late in the evening, when the guests had left, Lily had fallen asleep, and David had gone to take his parents home. Rachel took out her phone and stared at the screen for a long time. She had been restless all Christmas, thinking about Mark. How was he spending the day? With whom? Her knowledge of him suggested that he was probably alone, because Hannah was probably at the party with her mother. Her hand typed a message of its own accord. "Merry Christmas. Thinking of you." The answer came almost immediately, "And I think of you. Merry Christmas, dear." Rachel's heart ached at those words. She closed her eyes, clutching the phone to her chest. For the first time, she was experiencing the holiday with both joy and a sharp melancholy. The family celebrated the new year at home, the three of them. As the chimes struck, David hugged his wife and daughter and kissed Rachel on the cheek, wishing her a happy year. She responded in kind and even smiled, making only one wish: to finally find peace of mind in the new year, no matter what path it took. In January, after the holidays were over, anxiety set in for Rachel. She felt like every lie was tightening the knot, and sooner or later it would tighten around her throat. One evening, David came home from work earlier than usual. Rachel, engrossed in texting Mark on her phone, didn't even hear the front door slam right away. She was sitting on the couch, smiling at what Mark had written. He had sent a photo of a snowy park and the caption, "I miss you here." Rachel quickly typed a reply, "Me too." At that moment, David walked into the living room. "Who are you texting?" he asked unexpectedly. Rachel flinched and almost dropped the phone. In an instant, her heart sank somewhere down. Her fingers went cold from surprise. "Oh, you scared me," she said, trying to pull herself together. Just like that, with a colleague. In the evening, her husband frowned, his eyes narrowed. He was clearly irritated by something, maybe a bad day at work. He usually didn't care about her phone conversations, but now he looked at her suspiciously. "It happens," Rachel shrugged, feeling her cheeks flush. "A student has problems, and a colleague asks for advice on what to do." David extended his hand. "Show me." Rachel went cold. He had never demanded this before. Something must have really gotten under his skin now. "David, it's confidential," she tried to object. "Rachel," her husband's voice grew cold, "show me your phone." They had never stood before with such tension. Rachel held the phone in her hand, unable to give it up. If he saw the text messages with Mark, everything would collapse. David took a step closer, and she quickly locked the screen in a panic. "I can't," she breathed out. The husband stared, his eyes narrowed. There was silence for a few seconds, then he unclenched his hand. "Okay," he said too calmly. "If you can't, then don't." He turned and walked out of the room. Rachel stood there, stunned. This was so unlike David. No shouting, no argument, just gone. Her heart was pounding, her fingers were shaking. She ran after him and found him in his office, standing by the window with his back to the door. "Sorry," Rachel muttered. "I didn't mean to be rude. I just promised to keep a student's secret." He was silent, and she knew the excuse sounded strained. "It's okay, Rachel," he finally said quietly, without turning around. "I understand work." She heard bitterness or hurt in his voice, but she didn't argue. The rest of the evening passed in tense silence. David pretended nothing had happened, but something had changed. After that incident, Rachel became more careful. She deleted notifications on her screen, changed passwords. An uneasy premonition grew in her soul. What if he guessed? What if he started following her? She felt that she had already gone too far over the edge of the abyss. More than once, a painful thought came to her mind. What if she stopped everything? Stopped these secret meetings, stopped lying. Admitted to Mark that she couldn't go on. Every time, closing her eyes, she imagined. Here she is telling Mark that she won't come to the cafe anymore, won't answer his letters. How will he react? Surely he will understand, he won't reproach her. But will she be able to bear this loss herself? One late night, Not long after the incident with the phone, Rachel almost did. Sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, while David snored softly in his sleep, she typed a message to Mark on the phone. "We need to talk. I think it would be better if we stopped." The text went no further. Stop what? Seeing each other? Talking? Loving each other? She erased the word stop and wrote, "Just be friends." Her heart broke as she looked at those cold, implausible words. She could not think of a greater self-deception. With a trembling hand, she never pressed the send button, but instead deleted what she had typed. Tears of despair ran down her cheeks in the darkness. She realized that giving up Mark now was almost impossible for her, like cutting off a part of herself. Yes, she was acting selfishly, but she could not do otherwise. This refuge from pain had become too dear to her. One night, after David had fallen asleep, she went out onto the porch to get some fresh air. The light snow swirled in the lantern light. Rachel pulled her shawl tighter around her. How tangled everything was, love and deceit mixed together, with no way out in sight. She thought of Mark. He had made her happy, but at what cost? She thought of Lily. What would happen to her daughter if the family fell apart? She thought of David. He was human too, even if he had become distant. He didn't deserve to be stabbed in the back. No one did. It all happened at the end of February. That day, Rachel stayed late at work, this time honestly. She was helping to prepare for a school party. It was dark outside by that time. She hurried home, hoping to make it before dinner. Plans were spinning in her head: to write to Mark in the evening, to tell him about the funny incident with the students. When Rachel opened the front door, she immediately realized that something was wrong at home. The hallway was tensely silent. David's jacket was missing from the coat rack, meaning he was already home. There was no TV or voices. Usually at this time, Lily would be watching cartoons or playing, and David would be talking on the phone or bustling about in the kitchen. Now, nothing. Rachel walked into the living room. Neither her daughter nor her husband were there. Her heart sank. She went upstairs and looked into the nursery. Lily was sitting on the bed with a book, her eyes red. She had obviously been crying. Rachel rushed to her daughter. "Lily, darling, what happened?" The daughter looked at her reproachfully. "Why is Dad crying?" "Daddy." Rachel went cold. "Is he crying?" Lily nodded, her lips trembling. "Did you have a fight? I heard him talking to you, and then he started crying and went to his room." Rachel stroked her daughter's head, although her hands were shaking. "No, no, honey. Everything is fine. Dad was just upset about work, I guess. He said," the girl sobbed, "he said that his mother is leaving him. Is that true?" Rachel felt the air leave her chest. The words stuck. She hugged Lily tighter. "No, no, what are you saying? I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, although she herself was no longer sure whether it was a lie or the truth. "Your dad probably expressed himself incorrectly." While calming her daughter, she simultaneously tried to comprehend. David had found out everything. Rachel's heart was pounding as she tucked Lily into bed that night. Lily had fallen asleep, still clutching her mother's hand, as if she were afraid she would disappear. Rachel sat next to her, stroking her daughter's blonde hair, and one thought pounded in her head: David knows. He knows, or at least has guessed, that she's been deceiving him. And if that's the case, there's no point in pretending any longer. As Lily sobbed and fell asleep, Rachel gently pulled her hand away and kissed her daughter's forehead. Her heart was constricted with pain and guilt. She adjusted the blanket and quietly left, closing the door. Now came the hardest part: talking to her husband. David was downstairs in the living room. The house was dim, except for the soft yellow light from the floor lamp by the sofa. David was sitting on the edge of the sofa, his head bowed, his elbows on his knees, his hands fiddling with her phone. Rachel paused in the doorway for a moment, the sight of his broken posture piercing her heart. She had never seen her husband so dejected. He heard her footsteps and looked up. David's eyes were red, as if he had recently cried, but now his expression was focused and distant. Lily fell asleep, Rachel said quietly, feeling her voice tremble traitorously. David nodded, looking away. There was a heavy silence for a few seconds. Finally, Rachel couldn't take it anymore. "We need to talk." The husband smiled bitterly. "Now, yes." He stood up. Rachel noticed automatically how tired he was, as if he had aged overnight. David put her phone down on the coffee table. Seeing this, Rachel felt a pang of panic. Had he actually gained access? She was sure she had set a password. David noticed her look and answered without emotion. "Don't worry, I didn't hack your phone. It just died when I was trying to figure out the password." He spoke distantly, as if he were talking about something else entirely. Rachel swallowed. "Did you say something to Lily?" "No." He shook his head and adjusted his glasses on the bridge of his nose. "She didn't even notice when he put them on. She came herself when she heard how he hesitated, searching for the word, lost control of myself." Rachel closed her eyes, imagining the scene, David crying, Lily comforting him. Horrible. "David," she began quietly, "I want to explain." He raised his hand, stopping her. "Not now. I'm not ready to listen or talk." Rachel fell silent, looking at her husband in confusion. He took a step closer, looking at her face intently. "Just answer one question," he said hoarsely. "It's true, right? Do you have someone else?" Rachel's knees buckled. The words caught in her throat. But David's eyes demanded the truth. He already knew the answer. "Yes," she whispered barely audibly. David closed his eyes as if in great pain and took a deep breath. There was a ringing silence, broken only by the ticking of the old wall clock. "I see," he said finally, opening his eyes. "So my wife doesn't love me anymore." There was such bitterness in his voice that Rachel involuntarily stepped forward. "David, it's not because." But he pulled away, raising his palm. "Please, let's not go into details. It hurts too much right now." His honesty pierced her. She nodded, trying to hold back her tears. David ran his hand over his face, as if washing away the mask. "You know," he said slowly, "I've had an inkling for some time. I just didn't want to believe it. I closed my eyes. And even now, part of me wants to pretend it's not there. But I can't." Rachel remained silent, feeling that any word now would be superfluous. "I won't scream or find out who he is," David continued, his voice shaking. "That's not important. What's important is, when did this disappear between us? When did we become strangers?" He looked at her sharply, demandingly, as if trying to get to the bottom of things with his gaze. And Rachel didn't know the answer. "When? A year ago, 2, 5, gradually." "I don't know," she answered honestly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Forgive me." David closed his eyes, breaking eye contact. He stood there, clenching his fists, but not in anger, more like he was trying to control himself and not scream. "I thought," he began hoarsely, "I thought that we were simply fed up with our daily routine. That it's like that with everyone. Passion goes away, habit remains, respect, friendship in the end. After all, I loved you. I love you." Rachel burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. Hearing this confession now, after everything, she felt like a monster. David took a hesitant step toward her, but stopped short of touching her. "Don't cry," he asked quietly. "Not now." He turned away and stood for a few seconds, his hands clasped behind his head, trying to pull himself together. Then, in a calmer tone, he said, "So, I think we need some time, separately." Rachel dropped her hands, sobbing. "What do you want to say?" David smiled bitterly. "I think it's obvious. You don't want to continue living your life pretending now, do you? And I don't want to either." His words, harsh in essence, sounded tired. Rachel shook her head. "No, we probably won't be able to pretend anymore. That's what I'm talking about." He sank back onto the sofa, his strength seemingly gone. They were silent for a while, she standing, he sitting, a vast gulf between them. Finally, David muttered, "I'll write to you. Okay?" Rachel didn't understand at first. "Will you write?" He glanced at her briefly. "I can't, in words out loud. It's easier for me in another way, in writing." She nodded. What else could she do? Without another word, she quietly walked out, leaving him alone. As soon as Rachel left, David slowly sank back onto the couch. The empty living room was oppressively quiet. He ran his hands over his face. His heart was beating dully and angrily. His temples were pounding. The discovery he had made a few hours earlier had turned his whole world upside down. David remembered how, early that evening, while he was preparing dinner, Rachel's laptop on the kitchen table gave a quiet signal of incoming mail. The screen lit up, and his gaze was drawn to the pop-up window, an email from someone marked T. The subject of the letter was not visible, only the first words, "I can't stop thinking about last night, about your smile." Then the text broke off. David froze, not immediately understanding what it meant. But his heart already knew some part of him understood everything instantly, although his mind resisted. He closed the oven and came closer. His hands were cold. He needed to look away, but he couldn't. With a trembling cursor, David clicked on the notification. A letter opened several paragraphs. He read them, not believing his eyes. "Yesterday you were so beautiful, and I can still taste your lips. I know it's hard for us to find time, but every minute with you is priceless. I love you." Then there were words about plans to meet the day after tomorrow, about how I will wait at our place. At the bottom, a signature, "Your Mark." The ground seemed to drop out from under David. He looked at the date on the letter this morning. That meant yesterday. Yesterday she was with him, with this Mark. While David was working or doing chores, his wife would spend the evening with another man and come back looking into his eyes as if nothing had happened. Everything inside him boiled. The first impulse was to throw the damn laptop against the wall. David clenched his fists, feeling a shudder run through his body. He couldn't believe it, but he couldn't deny the obvious. The evidence was literally glowing on the screen. He rushed around the kitchen for a couple of minutes, not remembering himself, trying to cope with the rage and pain. He wanted to scream, but he held back. Lily was on the second floor. Little Lily, whom he had just helped with her homework, not suspecting anything. The image of his daughter appeared before his eyes, and this sobered him up a little. He must not make noise, he must not scare her. He must think and not destroy everything around him. David ran out onto the porch, slamming the door behind him. The crisp evening air hit his flushed face. He took several deep breaths, leaning against the railing. His chest was burning. How could she? Why? When did it go so far? Thoughts tore at his consciousness. Anger fought with despair. He felt humiliated, deceived, and scared at the same time. How to live on? What would happen to their family? A few minutes later, Lily looked outside. "Dad, everything okay?" David turned around. How his 10-year-old little girl had aged in one evening. No, it was his eyes that were swimming. He tried to smile. "It's okay, princess. Go into the house, I'll be right there." Lily didn't move, looking warily. David realized that he hadn't hidden his confusion. He came over and hugged his daughter, lightly stroking her back. "I'm sorry, honey. Dad was just upset." The girl asked quietly. "Because of Mom?" David's heart sank. He let go of her and, as calmly as he could, replied, "Adults sometimes upset each other. But don't worry, okay?" Lily nodded, her eyes glittering. She hugged him tightly, then ran back into the house. Left alone, David sat down right on the steps of the porch. He covered his face with his hands and finally gave free rein to his tears. Silently, like a man, only rare sobs escaped from his throat. Everything he had believed in for 12 years was collapsing. It was an unknown amount of time before he calmed down. When he returned to the house, Lily was sitting quietly on the stairs, already in her pajamas, anxiously waiting for him. David forced himself to smile. "Go to sleep, darling. Everything is fine." "Are you sure?" she whispered. He nodded, trying to sound convincing. He walked her to her room, covered her with a blanket, and kissed her forehead. She asked through her tears, "Will you separate from your mother?" David felt a lump in his throat. He stroked his daughter's hair. I don't know, honey. But no matter what happens, your mom and I love you very much. Remember?" Lily nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. David wiped them away with his thumb. You are not guilty of anything, do you hear? The adults will sort this out. The daughter hugged him and sobbed. I'm scared, Daddy. Me too, he blurted out, and he hugged his daughter tightly. But everything will be fine. We'll try to make it fine. When Lily fell asleep, David came down to the living room feeling empty. His tears had dried, leaving only a nagging pain somewhere in his chest. He sat down at the dining table and pulled the piece of paper that was lying there towards him. To write, he had told Rachel he would write, although he had no idea what exactly. But now the words seemed to come to him. David picked up the pen. His hand was shaking, but he wrote the first lines, Dear Rachel. That night she didn't sleep a wink. She lay in bed, staring into the darkness, feeling a dull numbness. There were no more tears. She thought she had cried them all while she was in the shower, trying not to wake Lily. Now there was an emptiness inside her, almost the calm that comes after a storm. He loves me, or did, the words echoed in her head. How long had it been since she had heard him simply say, I love you? Only in the morning, almost automatically, before leaving for work, he would say, I love you, but that was for the whole family at once. And now a real confession, and when? God, how it hurt. At breakfast that morning, David looked pale and silent. Lily, sensing something was wrong, barely spoke either, picking at her cereal. Rachel tried to act normal, but her hands shook as she poured the tea. She and David barely met each other's eyes. He only briefly said that he would drive Lily to school himself. Rachel nodded. She herself needed to think before going to work. When her husband and daughter left, she seemed to exhale, releasing the tension. For the first time, the house seemed strange and cold. In the kitchen, where they had eaten dinner together so many times, everything now seemed like a backdrop to someone else's happiness. Rachel sank into a chair, feeling a growing panic. Her marriage had practically collapsed overnight. What now? Divorce? What about Lily? What about the house, her job? And Mark? He probably hoped that they would be together now, but was she ready? Her thoughts were rushing about like frightened birds. To calm down a little, Rachel decided to occupy herself with something to do: clear the table, wash the dishes. And then she noticed a white envelope on the countertop. It was lying next to the coffee maker, in plain sight, but she hadn't paid attention to it while she was setting the table for breakfast. Now, taking it in her hands, she felt her heart tremble. Her name was written on the envelope. Rachel in English, in David's handwriting. Her hands weakened. She knew it was his letter. He had said, I'll write to you, and he must have written it overnight. Rachel sank back into her chair, holding the envelope as if it were fragile. Her heart began to pound, and she caught her breath. Gathering her courage, she tore open the edge and pulled out several sheets of paper covered in her husband's neat handwriting. David wrote in English, probably because it was easier for him to express his thoughts. She was fluent in the language too, so she understood the text without difficulty. The letter was long. Rachel took a deep breath and began to read. Dear Rachel, I'm not sure how to start. You know, I'm not a master of expressing emotions beautifully. It's always been easier for me to operate with facts and figures. But facts won't help now. I never thought I'd write a letter like this. From the very first day we became a couple, I believed that we were forever, that no matter what happened, we would cope. I remember how on our wedding day you smiled through tears of joy, squeezing my hand at the altar. Then I swore to myself that I would do everything to make you smile like that next to me forever. And maybe that's why I missed the moment when everything started to fall apart. Too afraid to admit that the smiles were dwindling. I don't want to blame you. Honestly, I think we're both guilty if we're going to look for someone to blame. But I also know that sometimes it's no one's fault. People change, they grow apart, that's life. Remember when Lily was little, you were always worried about whether you would be a good mother. And I said, you are the best woman I know, and you will definitely become a wonderful mother. And you know, I was not wrong. Lily is wonderful, and much of the credit for this goes to you. But I probably wasn't the best husband. You tried to tell me. I remember. Sometimes in the middle of the night, when you thought I was sleeping, you cried quietly. I felt it, but I didn't know how to react. For some reason, it seemed that in the morning everything would pass, there would be a new day, and everything would be fine. I avoided the conversation because I was afraid of problems. I thought, the main thing is that we are close. We have a home, a job, a child. That means everything is fine. How wrong I was. I missed you, Rachel. I didn't notice how you grew distant and faded. These are terrible words for me, but they are true. Apparently, I created all the conditions for you to find support and warmth somewhere else. There is no worse failure for a husband than the realization that the woman he loves sought comfort elsewhere. It hurts me so much to think about it. I'm not going to ask who he is or how long this has been going on. It hurts to know that it's going on at all. But it hurts even more to realize that with my indifference and isolation, I pushed you to this. With my constant work, absence, unwillingness to hear you, you deserve to be happy and feel loved. And if not with me then, so be it. I don't want to get angry or yell. Although the hurt and anger are raging inside me right now, I try to keep them in check. What I feel most right now is bitterness and sadness. Bitter sadness that we lost each other. I'm afraid for the future. I'm afraid that we'll ruin Lily's life. I never wanted her to grow up in a single-parent family. You know, it's a sore subject for me. My parents got divorced, and I dreamed of giving my daughter what I didn't have myself. But the only thing worse than divorce is living in lies and quiet hatred. I saw it in my father and mother. I want to understand only one thing. When did we become strangers to each other, and why didn't I notice it? Is it true that it's over, or can we try to fix it? I'm not sure if I can live with you knowing that you love someone else, but maybe for the sake of the family, it would be worth trying. I don't know. On the other hand, I see how bad you are. You were unhappy with me, weren't you? Forgive me for not being able to protect your heart. I remember the day Lily was born, how you held her in your arms and cried with happiness. We were so close then, so united. And now there is a wall between us, which we ourselves have built. I'm not asking for an answer right now, and I'm probably not ready to decide anything myself. I think we need to separate at least for a while. I'll stay with my brother for now or rent an apartment. Let's tell Lily that this is temporary. I don't want to hurt her too much right away. She's a smart girl. She's probably already understood a lot, but still. It hurts me to write all this, but I have to. If you already love someone else, I won't beg you to stay. I just ask, please be completely honest with me. We both deserve the truth. I love you. I probably will for a long time, if not forever. But I will let you go if it is best for you. Thank you for these 12 years. They were not in vain. We have Lily and many good memories. I will always be grateful to you for them. Forgive me for everything I did wrong. Yours, David. When Rachel finished reading the letter, she burst into tears. She clutched the pages to her chest, sobbing in the empty kitchen. The letter broke her heart, but at the same time, it put the pieces together. David had cared all these years. He had simply acted as best he could, and she had acted as best she could. They had both tried, but they had failed to preserve what was most important. She felt ashamed for all the minutes when she mentally accused him of coldness. He suffered too, just silently, and now he was more generous than she deserved. Not a word of reproach, not malice, only pain and love between the lines. What especially cut her? When did we become strangers, and why didn't I notice? She herself did not know the answer. Rachel read the letter again, through her tears, then carefully folded it and put it back in the envelope. The decision was growing in her mind with each reading. She had to talk to David openly and honestly as he had asked. Not to save the marriage, God knew. She wasn't sure that love could be restored after all, but to stop lying to him or herself. Looking at her watch, Rachel realized she was late for work. But today she couldn't go to school as if nothing had happened. She called her secretary, citing a family emergency, and took a few days off. The principal was understanding. Rachel rarely took time off. In the afternoon, she invited David to meet her in the park, the same one where she had recently walked with Mark. Paradoxically, now, as she was getting ready to go there with her husband, She felt the accents change. If she had been afraid of being recognized with Mark then, now she did not care who would see her with David. The ring on her finger suddenly became a heavy symbol of the duty they still bore. They met at a wooden gazebo deep in the park. David had come straight from work, wearing a suit and looking haggard. After greeting each other, they were both silent for a while, unsure how to begin. The air was filled with the smell of melting snow and the freshness of early spring. Finally, Rachel spoke up. "I read your letter. Thank you for writing." David nodded, looking away. "I hope it wasn't unnecessary." "No," she answered quietly. "It was necessary." He glanced at her. "Did you want to talk?" "Yes." She took a deep breath. "Honestly." David smiled bitterly. "Honestly, that's good." Rachel looked down at her clasped fingers. "You asked in your letter when we became strangers. I can't name the exact moment. It was probably gradual. It was just that one day I realized that I was very lonely next to you. You were always busy, withdrawn. I also went into work and caring for Lily. We stopped sharing what was on our souls, and I faded away." David listened in silence. His face betrayed no emotion, but the tension in his jaw showed how difficult it was for him to hear. Rachel continued, "I tried to tell you several times, maybe not directly. I hinted, complained about being tired. You said, 'Everything is fine.' But for me, it wasn't fine. And when a man appeared who began to see me as a woman, to listen to me, her voice trembled. I couldn't resist." She lowered her head, expecting a flash of anger or reproach. But David remained silent. Then she continued, getting to the main point. "I don't know what will happen next. Perhaps the love I felt can no longer be returned. I am guilty before you. But you are right, there is nothing worse than a lie." She finally looked him in the face. "I'm not asking for forgiveness now. I just want you to know you're a good man and a wonderful father. If we break up for good, it won't be because you're bad, but because we've both lost ourselves in the routine." David's eyes sparkled. He was holding back tears or emotions, but he still asked hoarsely, "Do you love him?" Rachel had been expecting this question and dreading it at the same time. "I don't know," she answered honestly after a pause. "I thought so. But now, everything is so mixed up. I only know that I came alive next to him. But whether it's right to call it love or running away from pain, I'm not sure." David bit his lip and nodded briefly. It's clear. They both fell silent, watching as someone's dog ran down the alley. David was the first to break the silence. "As I wrote, I'm not going to make a scene. I need to think about Lily." "Yes," Rachel said hotly. "Lily must not suffer." "But she's already suffering," he objected quietly. "Children feel everything." Rachel turned away, fighting back tears of guilt. David softened his voice slightly. "I'll look for an apartment in a few days. I think it's better for me to leave for now." "Maybe," Rachel managed, "if it makes you feel better. I can do it myself." "No," he shook his head firmly. "Lily needs her mother at home. I'll stay away for now. We'll tell her that Dad needs to live apart for a while, because of work, for example. And then we'll explain." Rachel looked at him gratefully. "Thank you." He smiled sadly. "Don't thank me. It's just the right thing to do." They stood there for a moment longer, not looking at each other, two people between whom everything had been said, but there was still no decision. "You asked for honesty until the end," Rachel said quietly. "I want to tell you, I've been really unhappy lately, but part of me still loves you, like family, like a part of my life. It hurts me that I hurt you like that." David closed his eyes. "That's a little easier to hear. Thank you. And one more thing," she added. "I'm not going to rush into a new relationship right away, even if we get divorced. I need to be alone, to figure myself out." David's face reflected relief and something like respect. "That's wise," he said quietly. "I think you really need to understand yourself." He looked at the ring on his finger, then at hers. Silently, he pulled off his wedding ring. Rachel held her breath. David clenched the ring in his fist. I don't know what to do next, Rachel. Right now, I'm just really hurt and empty. But I want you to be happy. She couldn't hold back any longer. She took a step towards him and hesitantly hugged him. For a second, David froze, but then he hugged her back, holding her tightly. Rachel felt the warmth of his body and almost burst into tears again. I'm sorry, she whispered. We are both to blame, he answered dully. They stood there for a moment longer, then let go. With one last look, David turned and walked away down the path. He kept his hand in his coat pocket, where he had hidden the ring. Rachel watched him go through a veil of tears until his figure disappeared around the bend. That evening, they explained to Lily that her dad would be living separately for a while. They came up with a story that he had an urgent project on the other side of town, and it would be more convenient to be closer to work. Lily, no matter how hard her parents tried to soften the blow, understood everything right away. She cried bitterly, begging her dad to stay. They had to promise that he would visit her almost every day and that it was temporary. Rachel lay alone in bed that night. For the first time in 12 years, David was not there. He had moved in with his brother. Everything in the house seemed strange and unfamiliar. Lily fell asleep only after stories and much coaxing, tightly hugging the teddy bear that her dad had given her on her last birthday. Rachel knew they had broken their child's heart, and now their task was to at least glue these fragments neatly together. A difficult road awaited her, but she felt one thing clearly: the mask was gone. Now she stopped lying and pretending to be well. For the first time in a long time, she could breathe honestly, albeit bitterly. Several weeks passed. The Bennett family's life was split into before and after. David rented a small apartment closer to downtown Seattle and moved there, coming several times a week to visit Lily and help with chores. He was calm, even friendly with Rachel, but there was a shadow of uncertainty between them. They did not officially announce the divorce, putting it off until the right time. Lily believed that her father was just temporarily working too much, but her anxiety did not go away. One night, when Lily was already asleep, Rachel sat in the kitchen with a mug of tea, trying to write in her diary. On the advice of a psychologist colleague, she began writing down her thoughts and feelings in order to understand herself. The page of the notebook was covered with doubts and questions. Who am I without my family? What do I want? Do I really love Mark, or was it just an attempt to escape the pain? How can I make myself and Lily happy? She wrote. Her inner gaze often returned to the image of Mark. They had hardly seen each other since the breakup. Only once did Rachel write him a long letter, where she honestly told him everything, that her husband had found out that she and David had broken up, and that her main task now was to help her daughter and find herself. She thanked Mark for the feelings he had awakened, for his support and understanding. But she also wrote directly that she was not yet ready for a new relationship and did not want their connection to be built on the ruins of her old life. The letter was not easy for her. It seemed that she was breaking someone's heart again, this time Mark's. At this time, Mark was sitting at home, rereading Rachel's letter for probably the 10th time. Outside the window, the early spring twilight was thickening. Hannah was playing in the next room, humming to herself from time to time today. It was the daughter's turn to be with her mother, and Mark was left alone. He felt how each time he read the lines of the letter, they echoed painfully in his chest. Rachel asked him not to wait for her and said that she had to focus on herself and her daughter. Every word was filled with her love for her family and, at the same time, sadness. Mark understood everything. He himself, entering into this relationship with her, knew that it would not be easy, but his heart hoped for a miracle. Now the miracle was postponed indefinitely. There was a blank response open on the laptop. Mark was trying to find the right words. He didn't want to pressure her, didn't want to add to her guilt. All he wanted now was for Rachel to feel supported, even as she let him go. Finally, he started typing. Rachel, thank you for your honesty. I understand your decision, and I respect it. My feelings are still there, but I won't rush you or push you. I want you to smile for real again. If it takes time, I'll wait. You're strong. You can do it. I believe you. He paused, then added at the end, Know that I am here, always. Mark reread what he had written. The lines were a little blurry before his eyes. He noticed too late that he was crying. He quickly wiped away a tear with his palm. No, this was not a farewell forever. This was just a pause, he told himself. If fate willed it, they would be together again. He pressed send and leaned back in his chair, covering his face with his hands. The bitterness of loss clenched his throat, but at the same time he felt a strange relief. He had done the right thing, not selfishly dragging her to him. She was free to make her own choice, and he hoped that one day she would choose him. Rachel cried for almost an hour at these words, holding the phone in her hands. They were tears of relief and sadness mixed together. She was lucky to have met such a person, and what a pity that the timing was so unsuitable. But perhaps the future still holds a chance for them, just not now. Rachel took on fewer hours at work to spend more time with her daughter. She tried to fill Lily's days with warmth. They did homework together, drew, and walked in the park. But Lily still felt false. One evening, while putting her to bed, Rachel heard a quiet question. "Mom, are you and Dad going to get divorced?" Rachel's hand, which had been adjusting the blanket, froze. Lily looked serious, not like a child. "Why do you ask, dear?" Rachel answered softly, trying to buy time. The daughter lowered her eyes. "You think I don't understand. You're arguing, Dad's gone. Many parents in my class were getting divorced. I saw how it happened. They also said project or a business trip at first." Rachel felt a lump in her throat as she listened to these words, wise beyond her years. "Lily," she whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Daddy and I really need to live apart for a bit now." "You don't love each other anymore?" the girl asked bluntly, and her voice trembled. Rachel felt her heart squeeze with pain. How simple and cruel everything seems to a child, love or not love. "We love you very much." She took her daughter's hand in hers. "And each other, we're tangled up. Sometimes adults lose what was between them. It doesn't mean someone is bad. It just happens." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Was it because of me that you had a fight? Did I behave badly?" "No, of course not." Rachel leaned over, hugging her daughter. "It's not your fault. You're the best thing we have. It's just that Mom—" She paused, searching for the truthful words. "Mommy needs to figure herself out right now. I need time to be myself again. Do you understand?" Lily sobbed into her shoulder. "Have you stopped being yourself?" Rachel stroked her daughter's back, holding back tears. "Probably a little bit. Forgot what I used to be like, cheerful, happy. It wasn't your fault or Dad's. It just happened that way. And you need time." "Yes, dear. It will take a little time to fix everything inside." Lily pulled away and wiped her eyes with her fists. "And if you and Dad are not together, what will happen to us?" "We'll always be your parents," Rachel said firmly. "That will never change. We both love you more than anything in the world." The girl nodded, trying to understand. "You won't go far, will you?" she asked anxiously. Rachel shook her head. "No, of course not. Even if Dad and I live separately, you will be able to see both of us whenever you want." Finally, Lily calmed down a little. She laid her head on the pillow, still clutching her mother's hand. "I want you to be happy, Mom," she suddenly said quietly. Rachel could hardly hold back tears of surprise. This was a 10-year-old child speaking. "My dear," she kissed Lily tenderly. "Thank you, and I want you to be happy. Daddy and I will try." Lily closed her eyes, still whispering, "I love you." "I love you too, very, very much," Rachel whispered back. Rachel couldn't sleep for a long time that night. Her daughter's words kept running through her head. "You won't go far, will you?" And "I want you to be happy." Lily, without realizing it, had given her permission to think about her own happiness too. Children are sometimes wiser than adults. A few days after her frank conversation with her daughter, Rachel received an unexpected visitor at work. Samantha, the same high school student with whom she had spoken a few months ago about her parents' divorce, dropped into her office at school after classes. The girl looked calmer than she had in winter. Her hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail. Her eyes were determined. "Samantha, hi," Rachel smiled, gesturing for her to come in. "It's nice to see you. How are you?" The teenager sat down on a chair and smiled weakly. "Probably better than last time." Rachel noticed a small envelope in the girl's hands. "I wanted to thank you, Mrs. Bennet," Samantha said a little shyly. "You were very supportive of me last winter." "I'm so glad to hear that." Rachel felt warmth from her words. "How are you at home? Is everything okay?" Samantha looked down at the envelope and turned it over in her fingers. "My parents got divorced after all," she said quietly. "Dad lives somewhere else now. It was hard at first. Mom was worried for a long time too. But we started going to family therapy, as you advised." "That's great," Rachel responded sincerely. "Does it help?" Samantha nodded. "Yes, we learned to talk to each other without shouting. I realized that their divorce was not my fault. And now I'm not so scared. Mom has become more cheerful. Dad also comes every weekend, and we spend time together, just not under the same roof anymore. I've come to terms with it." Rachel felt relieved for the girl. "I'm very glad that you were able to fix everything." Samantha timidly handed her the envelope. "This is a postcard for you. I'm graduating soon. We had a graduation ball yesterday. I wanted to thank you officially, but you didn't come." Rachel didn't show up for the prom. She was busy with Lily that day and generally avoided unnecessary events. She accepted the envelope. "Thank you, Samantha. Can I open it now?" "Certainly." The envelope contained a graduation photo of Samantha in a ball gown standing between what appeared to be her parents. All three were smiling. The caption on the back read, "Thank you for your support. You helped keep my family together. Love, Sam." "Oh," was all Rachel could say, looking at the happy faces. She took a deep breath, holding back the emotions that were rushing through her. "That's so touching. You're very smart." Samantha stood up, and Rachel rose to greet her. Without saying a word, they embraced, teacher and student, two souls who had been through hard times. "Good luck," Rachel whispered. "And remember, there's good stuff ahead." "You too," Samantha answered quietly. After the girl left, Rachel stared at the photograph for a long time. It was amazing. She had helped this family survive the split, but she had not been able to save her own. However, instead of bitterness, she felt a strange relief. Perhaps for Lily, her and David's world would not completely collapse either. It would just be different. The main thing was to surround her with love, as these two surrounded their daughter. Rachel put the photograph back in the drawer, feeling a little lighter in her heart. Spring turned to summer. Living apart slowly became normal. Rachel and David tried to maintain an even, friendly relationship for the sake of their daughter. They went to the school play together, where Lily played the role of a flower. Together, they threw her 11th birthday party. Rachel was hesitant at first whether it was right to organize a joint celebration, giving her daughter false hopes, but David assured her that for Lily's sake, it was worth doing everything as usual. So in May, they both got busy preparing. They invited Lily's classmates, decorated the living room with balloons. David arrived early to help blow up the balloons and hang garlands. While he fiddled with the pump, Rachel watched him furtively. He seemed focused, trying to do everything perfectly. It touched her and at the same time hurt her after all. Only a year ago, they were doing the same thing, but then they were husband and wife in the truest sense of the word. When the children arrived, the house was filled with laughter and noise. Lily beamed with happiness as she accepted the gifts. Rachel and David brought out the cake with candles together, and as they sang "Happy Birthday" together, their eyes met across the table. For a moment, they smiled at each other genuinely, sharing pride in their daughter. In that moment, they were like the old Rachel and David, happy parents, rejoicing for their child. But the moment passed. In the evening, when everything had quieted down, the guests had left, and Lily, having played enough, had fallen asleep. Rachel stayed in the kitchen washing the dishes. She mechanically folded paper plates and wiped up spilled juice, and tears rolled down her cheeks. The day had gone well. Lily was happy. David left, hugging his daughter and thanking Rachel for the holiday. But there was a gaping emptiness in her soul. The usual routine had collapsed, and even warm moments together now only emphasized how everything had changed. For some time after the breakup, Mark wrote her messages, neutral ones, finding out how things were, telling her about his successes. For example, he mentioned that one of his stories had been accepted into a literary magazine. Rachel congratulated him wholeheartedly. Gradually, their correspondence faded away. Both understood that the pause was dragging on. But neither he nor she dared to put an end to it, or, on the contrary, resume everything. It was like a fragile balance. One summer day, when the weather was especially warm, David invited Lily to spend the weekend with him in nature. They were going to go to a bay near the city. There was a beach and a picnic area. Lily really wanted her mother to go too, but Rachel politely declined, citing business. She thought it was right to give David the opportunity to be alone with his daughter. Besides, she was afraid that if they went together, Lily would again start to build hopes for a reunion of her parents. But by evening, Rachel, having finished her business, suddenly felt the urge to go there, to the shore. Not to interfere, but just to watch from afar how they were spending their time. She needed to see her daughter smile, to make sure that everything was all right. Perhaps, deep down, she wanted to see David too, to make sure that everything would be all right with him. The sun was setting as she pulled up to a familiar spot on the bay. It was a long summer day, and though it was getting dark, the sky was still golden. Rachel parked the car and walked down to the beach, keeping to the shade of the coastal pines. From a distance, she saw a sight that made her heart clench and melt at the same time. Lily was playing on the sand at the water's edge. The little girl was running barefoot after the incoming waves, squealing mischievously when the cold water touched her feet. David was standing nearby, his trousers rolled up to his knees and his shoes off too. He said something to his daughter, and Lily ran toward him, laughing. David picked her up and spun her around like he had when they were little, and she laughed loudly. Their laughter carried even here, where Rachel stood in the shadows. She leaned her shoulder against the trunk of a pine tree, watching them from afar. Tears welled up in her eyes, but now they were bright tears. For the first time in a long time, she looked at David and Lily from the outside and saw not a part of her everyday life, but two people close to her, who would always be close to her, even if their paths diverged. The setting sun was turning the bay water a warm orange. The sky on the horizon was a shimmering rose gold, with the occasional cloud tinged crimson. The air smelled of salt and seaweed, and a solitary seagull cried out in the distance. A light breeze stirred the tops of the pine trees, whispering its secrets to the evening. Lily and David were now building something out of the sand at the water's edge, perhaps a fort like they had done in the old days when the three of them would come here together. Rachel remembered that beach they had run out there a couple of times on weekends when Lily was 5 or 6. They had been a family then, and it seemed like they would always be that way. But life had changed. Painfully, hard, but it had changed. And now she stood alone in the distance. Rachel ran her hand over the rough bark of the tree, feeling the unevenness beneath her fingers, the reality. Her fingers found the thin, pale mark of her wedding ring on the ring finger of her right hand. She had taken it off a few weeks ago, finally accepting what had happened. She still loved these two people, her daughter and the man who had been her husband. She loved them in different ways, but always deeply. That love had not gone away, despite everything that had happened. But at the same time, for the first time in many years, she felt love for herself. Not selfishness or narcissism, but a quiet acceptance of herself as an individual who also deserved happiness. Yes, she had made mistakes, she had betrayed herself, but she was truly becoming herself again, someone who could feel, dream, live. And for that reason alone, it had not all been in vain. Suddenly, she heard Lily's ringing voice. "Mommy." Rachel winced. Lily was standing on the sand, looking straight at her. She must have noticed her figure by the trees. David straightened up and turned around too. There was a brief moment of awkwardness. Rachel thought she must look strange, standing alone and watching from afar. But Lily was already waving. "Come to us." David leaned over slightly and seemed to say something to his daughter, but she continued to call. "Mom, come here. The water is not cold at all." Rachel wiped the tears from her cheeks in confusion and tried to smile. Feelings were fighting in her chest. Should she approach, or should she leave, keeping her distance? She didn't want to interrupt their fun now, but her daughter was calling, and a refusal might hurt her feelings. Finally, she walked slowly across the sand toward them. The wind from the bay ruffled her hair, and the smell of salt and seaweed hit her face. David and Lily were waiting at the water's edge. Lily was beaming with joy at the unexpected meeting. "Mom, you're here." The girl ran up and hugged her with her arms wet from the splashes. Rachel laughed through her tears. "Yes, dear, I decided to get some fresh air." David stood nearby, holding the shoes in his hand. He looked embarrassed, but not irritated. His face was calm. "Hello," he said quietly. "Hi," Rachel replied, looking into his eyes. She saw mixed emotions in his gaze, both pain and warm concern. He nodded towards the sky. "The sunset is beautiful, isn't it?" "Very much," she agreed. Lily, whose attention was quickly switching, had already pulled her mother by the hand. "Let's go show you our sand castle. It's almost ready." Rachel let her daughter pull her closer to the water. She felt the icy water wash over her feet through her sandals and pulled back. "Cold," she laughed. "I told you not to be afraid," Lily giggled. "Look, there will be a tower here." Rachel leaned toward the wet sand structure, echoing her daughter's rapt story. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw David standing nearby, a little further away, as if giving her space. Their eyes met for a moment, and they both smiled warmly, for the first time in a long time, without tension, just like old good friends, connected by what was most precious to them. The three of them stayed on the beach until dark. They lit a small fire, collecting dried seaweed and kindling. They baked marshmallows on twigs David found nearby. Lily bustled around happily. Rachel looked from her daughter's shining face in the firelight to David's thoughtful profile. Her heart was filled with quiet happiness, even if this evening did not mean that they were a family again, but it meant that they could be together without pain and anger. When it was completely dark, they got ready to go home together. David was taking Lily to his place for the night, as agreed. In the parking lot, having buckled his daughter into the car seat, he approached Rachel. Lily had already dozed off, tired from playing and the fresh air. "I'm glad you came," David said quietly, looking down. "Lily won't forget this." "It was good for me too," Rachel answered honestly. "Thank you." They stood there awkwardly, unsure whether to hug goodbye or not. Finally, David lightly touched her shoulder. "Take care of yourself, okay?" "And you," she replied. David's car disappeared into the twilight, and Rachel stood for a moment, watching it go. The night was warm and starry, the lights of distant Seattle twinkling on the horizon. Rachel walked to the water's edge, where the outline of Lily's sand castle was still visible. The waves were already beginning to wash away the turrets. "Nothing lasts forever," she thought, "but while it lasts, it can be beautiful." Her marriage had fallen apart like that castle, but there had been something beautiful about it. Their daughter was proof of that. And the love that had been there, though gone, had left something good behind. She took a deep breath of the salty air, looking out over the dark expanse of the bay. Her chest was heavy and relieved at the same time. The future was unknown, whether they would officially divorce or whether fate would ever cross their paths again in a different way. She didn't know. Nor did she know whether she would be with Mark or whether their paths had diverged forever. Life was uncertain, as shifting as this sand. But Rachel knew one thing for sure. From now on, she would not live only for someone else. She would live for herself too. Only then could she be truly alive and therefore truly love those dear to her. The thought warmed her like a cloak on a cool night. Rachel took one last look at the horizon where the daylight was fading, then turned and walked back to the car. The night lay ahead, and beyond it a new day, and she would meet it at last with an open heart. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.